Yo guys, what's going on? It's Dude here, and today we're back with a brand new video. This time we're going to be discussing how to lower your performance points rating in Gran Turismo 7, and more specifically, optimizing your car to get the absolute best lap time possible under a certain performance points limit. This is something that I personally have a lot of experience doing, especially earlier in GT7's life, but even now I've discovered the meta on how you want to set up your cars for some of the performance points limited races here in GT7. So if you guys do end up finding this video useful and or enjoy it, leaving a like, comment, and subscribing would greatly help me out. We recently actually just eclipsed 11,000 subscribers, so I'm very thankful for that. But without further ado, let's get into how to optimize your performance points rating and how to lower your PP rating on any given car. The first thing I want to do is take a base car. For today's example, I'm going to be taking the street car version of the Ford GT 2017, and I'm going to be showing you the difference between a bad and poorly optimized road car build and a well optimized one. Now, for many of my setups in my other setup videos, you'll see me leaning into heavy cornering, lots of downforce, things that will make the car handle as well as possible and be as balanced on all four tires as possible. Well, that's good for horsepower and weight limited racing and maybe some of the higher performance points brackets. But for most PP levels in this game, you want to heavily lean into having more horsepower rather than better handling. An example on this Ford GT 2018, this would be the type of build that I put on maybe one of my maxed out cars. As much power as I can get under the PP limit with almost as much weight reduction as I can get on the car. And this would be a good base setup for something like maxed out for a horsepower limited race. Unfortunately, 422 horsepower is not a lot of power for a 700 PP build. So in order to get way more horsepower out of this car, we're going to have to make some sacrifices in the handling department on other places on the car. The most effective method, in my opinion, of lowering your PP rating in Gran Turismo 7 is lowering the front downforce and raising the rear downforce. Now, in the example I gave, the rear downforce was already really high, but the main thing is to lower the front downforce. Now, obviously, this is going to result in far less cornering. But with that being said, 100 pounds of downforce is worth 20 performance points, and 20 performance points is performance points we can use to add more horsepower to the car, and we are going to be gaining far more lap time from that horsepower than we would from that extra downforce. Now, the Ford's minimum downforce value, at least as equipped, is actually quite high. Most cars will go down somewhere between 80 and like 40. I would say for most cars around 700 pp, you want to be maybe around 50 downforce minimum, somewhere between 50 and 100. But minimum downforce on many cars works extremely well, especially if the car is mid-engined. Now, obviously, with lowering the front downforce and raising the rear downforce, you're going to be getting a lot of understeer. So a change I like to make to the suspension in order to counter this understeer is to raise the rear ride height. Some cars don't really respond very well to raising the rear ride height all the way, so you definitely want to play around with how much ride height that you're adding. With that being said, getting that extra rotation back through the rear ride height is a worthwhile change on a car that has no front downforce. Normally, I wouldn't like to do this on one of my maxed out builds, but for these PP optimized builds, it's definitely worth it. Another important change for maximizing your lap time potential under your desired performance points rating is taking off the racing brakes and the brake pads. This is going to make the car noticeably worse in the braking zones, but to be honest, you're not going to actually be losing as much time from running stock brakes than you would racing brakes. And once again, this frees up a lot of performance points. On the Ford GT in particular, almost 12 performance points where you could be adding more horsepower. So once again, this is definitely a worthwhile change on most cars that you try. Now, I will say, once you get into the higher performance points rating, things like front downforce and having good brakes start to matter a lot more. We'll definitely lose more time from running terrible brakes, and we'll also lose more time from not being able to keep their momentum up in the higher speed corners. But for these lower performance points builds, anything below 700 or even 600 with sports tires or anything like that, you definitely don't want to run racing brakes, and you definitely don't want to run a lot of front downforce. The benefit you get going from 300 to 400 horsepower is going to be a greater benefit lap time wise than going from 800 to 900 horsepower, which is why at lower performance points ratings, there are more exploits and tricks and things that you should sacrifice in the handling department in order to add more horsepower. Another trick I used on this Ford is to put ballast weight over the rear. Now, anyone who's keen on adding ballast weight would know that adding ballast weight to the front of the car will generally lower the performance points more than adding it to the rear. With that being said, adding the weight to the rear is not only going to lower your performance points by 20 actually in the case of this Ford GT, but this 165 ballast that I've put on the back is also helping with the rear end traction. And with this extreme weight distribution, it's negating a lot of the understeer that I'm going to be experiencing because I lowered the front downforce. Not only are these changes working together to lower the performance points further, but they're actually working together to counteract each other, which is just icing on the cake when trying to lower your PP rating. Because traction is king on this game, on rear-wheel drive cars, you definitely want to send that weight to the driven wheels so the car will hook up better out of the corner. And for that exact same reason, on front-wheel drive cars, FFs prefer having the weight over the front tires. Now, FFs aren't very good for PP racing in general anyways. With that being said, if you are going to be running them in a performance points limited room, you definitely want to throw weight over the front tires instead of the rear tires. And while the mid-corner balance is definitely going to hurt a little bit because of this front end weight, the traction coming out of the low speed corners is going to improve, and traction in FF cars is the priority considering the front tires are doing everything in an FF car. Another trick that works extremely well in the lower performance points races is staggering your tires. Now, this is something that should not be done in a tire wear race or a race where there are pit stops and you're going to have to pit for tires in the middle of the race. When you do a pit stop in Gran Turismo 7, unfortunately you can't equip two different tire compounds on the front and the rear, but for sprint racing, putting harder tires on the front can sometimes be beneficial in certain cars. Once again, the Ford GT is a mid-engine car and will naturally rotate better than front-engine cars, therefore putting mediums on the front is not going to make the car undrivably understeery, and once again it lowers the performance points even further than if you were running racing softs. In this case, it's almost 10 performance points less to put the mediums on the front. The reason that you want to keep softs on the back is for extra grip coming out of the low speed corners, because soft tires are always going to be better than mediums in that case. So if you're not running a tire wear race and simply stick to sprint races under the PP that you're racing at, this is a very good strategy as well. Tire stagger, very good, not necessary on every car, but on this car in particular and many mid-engine cars, I like to use it. The next tip I can give you guys is to avoid using unnecessary parts such as clutch and flywheel, propeller shaft, and anti-lag system. Now, I do understand that these parts have some sort of tangible benefit, but once again, just like racing brakes, the benefit that they provide is not worth the performance points gain that they end up giving you. There's been a little bit of deliberation amongst me and my friends around whether or not the anti-lag is useful in PP racing, but when you also consider the fact that the anti-lag system significantly hurts your fuel economy as well, I would say for PP racing specifically, it's generally better to turn it off. Now, there is one more method I want to share with you guys before I end this video, but before we get to that, we're going to be looking at the before and after setups here for a PP optimized build at 700 for this Ford and a non-optimized one. The car has gained 233 horsepower, a bucket load of torque, while it's gotten over 300 pounds heavier. The lap time potential of the second build, the PP optimized build, is going to absolutely destroy the handling build on every single track. The lower in the performance points brackets that you get, 650, 600, 550, and lower, the more that these techniques and exploits are going to gain you time. For 750 to 800 performance points cars, things like staggering the tires and using a lot of ballast weight and even removing racing brakes on occasion are not actually worth it, especially around 800 pp, but lowering the front downforce and most of the time removing the racing brakes is still going to work well in the higher PP ranges. And this is one of the main reasons why the performance point system is so broken in Gran Turismo 7, and I kinda wish they would go back to the Gran Turismo 6 formula, which I believe to be more fair on average. A bonus technique that I haven't applied on many cars, but I do think works on several cars that have lots of torque and a very linear power band across the board, is using the fully customizable manual transmission. An example of this is my 700 performance points build on the BMW M4. So the strategy here is to use the manual transmission, which obviously shifts far slower than the regular racing transmission and is going to lose you time on your upshifts. With that being said, the manual transmission has a lower PP than the fully customizable racing transmission, meaning that you could add more horsepower to your car. In this case, I was able to go from 585 horsepower to 623. Now, while on a lot of cars, the upshifts will often offset the performance benefit of the extra horsepower, on the M4, I'm running a 4-speed transmission where really the only gears that I really end up using are 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, 5th, maybe sometimes 6th, depending on the situation, but almost never. And as a result, I'm not actually having to shift that often because the car has a very linear power band. I'm staying in the power band for an extremely long time, and I can afford to run a 4-speed transmission. And on this car, it actually ends up making it faster. And these are the main ways that I know how to abuse the performance points system and skew the advantage back into my favor when it comes to competitive races. This is one of the main reasons I like racing in much higher performance points road car rooms or race car rooms, is because these performance points exploits are a little bit less effective and the racing is generally more fair. But unfortunately, if you want to dominate in your performance points based rooms or the single player events that you might be having a hard time with, using these strategies to optimize your builds will be greatly helpful, and I really hope you guys enjoy it and find this useful. Once again, if you did enjoy, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks again for 11,000 subscribers, and happy Halloween to everybody out there. I know it was a few days ago at the time I'm posting this, but I really do appreciate everybody's support. Without letting this video drag on too long, I hope you guys all have a fantastic night. It's been your boy Dude, and I'm out. Peace.